Hi, I'm Melle Hartman, and today we're talking about ovulation predictor tests. More specifically, what they are, how to use them, how often to take them, and how they can help you to determine when you may be ovulating. So the first thing you need to understand is, what are these little guys actually measuring? They're not measuring if you have ovulated or if you're in the middle of ovulation. They're measuring a specific hormone that's involved in ovulation. The hormone is called luteinizing hormone, and it sort of peaks right before the egg is released. Actually, what happens is it's one of the hormones that triggers the cascade of hormones that causes the follicle to let that egg out and into the fallopian tube. It will peak about 24 to 48 hours before you ovulate. So if you take your test and it's positive, it's a good time to, do your little baby dance right away, and even the next day as well. Also the days leading up to it, but I hope you're already doing that. Now, how do you use these ovulation predictor tests? Well, if you get the kind that you actually pee on, like those, more expensive pregnancy tests, you literally just, put them into your stream of urine for, I guess, 3 to 5 seconds, whatever it says on the package, and then you let them be until the time says that you can read them. They're really expensive. If you can afford to do that, awesome, that's great. These guys, this box of 100 was $30 Canadian. So if you're from the States, you know that that's $20 in your money. So I don't feel bad taking these maybe more often than I would. And since I had a miscarriage a couple cycles ago, my cycle's been not as regular as it was. So I'm taking these more often than I would have, just because I really want to catch that peak after my hormones have been sort of disrupted. So what you're going to want to do if you're taking one of this type of test is you're going to have to pee into a container. Here are some ideas of containers that you might want to pee into. Tupperware, old yogurt container, shot glass, and my favorite, old NyQuil bottle top, which is what we're going to use because my pee container is exactly like it. Now, we're not going to use pee, but we can use one of my kids' apple juices because it looks kind of similar and it's less gross. So you're going to want to pee into your container, and you're not going to want to dribble on the counter or on your hands ideally. Then you will open your kit. You don't want to open these too far in advance, okay? They're sealed with a special little, those little things that prevent moisture. Of course, it doesn't want to come out right now. Anyway, so you've peed in your cup, and now, according to the instructions on these are the pre-mom ones. The brand is called Easy at Home. And it says right here, immerse the tip for 5 seconds and then lay flat. So this is literally what I do in my pee. This better not be positive, because otherwise it'll be funny. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. Okay, you see the ink is starting to run. Hope you can see that. And then you lay it flat to process. I'm not going to drink it. I very much considered just shooting it, but that would have been really, really uncomfortable for later when it's used against me. And then you're going to let your ovulation strip just kind of sit for the full 3 to 5 minutes. You don't want to read it after 5 minutes. This one says 3 minutes to develop. To be honest, I've used these for months now. After 3 minutes, the dye is not always fully kind of run through. So I sometimes have to give them closer to 5 minutes to be able to read them and for them to have an actual valid response. So when do you start taking these tests? If you have a regular menstrual cycle, 28 days, where you ovulate on day 14, you'll probably peak with your LH on day 12, 13. So you can start testing day 9, 10, and that's super, super safe. I always ovulate a little bit late. Day 15, 16 is usually my peak, and day 16, 17 is usually my ovulation day. Last cycle, I peaked on day 17, and my earliest peak ever was day 14. Now, in terms of time of day, you can kind of take these anytime. The first couple days leading up toward your peak day, you don't need to take it more than once a day. Also, when you do have your peak, most women have their surge beginning at between 5 and 9 a.m. in the blood, which means that about 4 or 5 hours later, you'll see that surge in the urine. So around 11 a.m. is a pretty decent time. I mean, if you want to use first morning urine, you totally can with this type of test. We really just want to see when your body starts to really go in overdrive to make this hormone that really pushes that egg out. It happens. You start to peak. You take a test and you notice that the control line and the test line are almost the same darkness, or maybe the test is even a little bit darker. Okay, so what do? Well, you want to keep testing. You want to see how long your peak lasts, because that's going to give you some useful information. It's also interesting to know when the highest point of your peak is. So your surge might begin where you'll get like a positive test maybe at like in the morning, and you'll have positive tests potentially like that whole day and into the next day. But to really be able to pinpoint ovulation, if you know which test was like your darkest, when your surge was the most strong, you can usually say that about 20 to 24 hours after that strongest, darkest test is when you will ovulate. So it's a nice idea once you start to see them becoming positive to maybe go up to like 3 times a day is totally sufficient, every 8 hours or so, just so you can kind of monitor your own peak. Now, everybody's surge length is different. I'm one of the ones who kind of like suddenly goes up and it stays there for like 24 hours and then it like falls really suddenly. Some people will only peak for 12 hours. So if you're not taking them twice a day when they start to darken, you might miss it. So you might want to, when you're getting closer to like that potential surge day, start doing it every 12 hours just to make sure you don't like miss your surge. But most people, it's a bit longer than that. Some people will surge for a couple of days. Some people will surge and have like multiple peaks. All of this is normal. All of this is totally fine. Generally speaking, the darkest line is going to be 24 hours before you ovulate. So that's all you really have to remember. If you're like me, you might like line them up on a paper, or if you want to do it like the actual regular person digital way, a lot of the apps, the fertility tracking apps, are going to have a function where you can kind of take a picture and log your different types of strips. And then you can kind of like compare them and see them in a row. It's really satisfying. All right, so now you've been tracking your OPKs for a couple of cycles and you can pretty much predict that you peak around, let's say, day 14, 15. How do you use this information to your advantage? Well, we know that we ovulate about 24 hours after your peak in your luteinizing hormone in the urine. And we know that you're the most fertile in the 5 days before and the day of, and sometimes the day after ovulation. To be honest, like the most fertile days are starting like 2 to 3 days before ovulation up until ovulation day. That's like the hot zone. You want to really get in some sessions at that time. And this doesn't tell you kind of until you're on that like day before ovulation. So you really want to be using these for a couple of months to track so that you can really understand, like, so if you're getting your peak on day 15, let's say, starting around day 12, you're going to want to have regular sex in order to really maximize conception. You definitely want to have sex on the day that this peaks, and you probably want to have sex the day after, which is ovulation day. And for insurance, the day after that, because sometimes these do peak 48 hours before ovulation. The sperm can live for like 6 days if you have like quality cervical mucus. So it's not terribly important to like do it afterwards, but you can, I mean, bonus. When do you stop taking them? Well, you can kind of take them until you start to peak. And if you have done it for a couple cycles, you'll know, let's say you start to see positive tests and then like within 12 hours, your peak starts to go down. You don't need to kind of test through your peak if you've done it a couple of times and you know your cycle. Otherwise, you might want to stop testing when you start to see that surge going down and the tests are no longer getting darker, they're only getting lighter. Now, the first cycle you use these, you're going to get a lot of data, but you're only going to get data kind of after your fertile period. So you ideally want to start using these before you plan to try to conceive. You'll want to get a good 2, 3, 4 cycles of OPKs kind of under your belt to really identify your most fertile times, being like, you know, the 2 days, let's say, before you get your peak day, and the day after, which is ideally ovulation day. You don't really want to be taking these starting like early in your cycle because you're just going to be wasting money, and you can take them through until you get either a positive pregnancy test or your period. But that's not going to give you that much information either. So one sort of side note interesting thing about luteinizing hormone is that chemically, the structure of the molecule, at least the beginning of the chain, is very similar to human chorionic gonadotropin, which is HCG, which is what we like measure in our urine to see if we're pregnant. So when your pregnancy test becomes positive, usually these will turn positive again too. Now this cannot replace a pregnancy test, but it's interesting to know that like if you happen to take one of these, you know, maybe 10, 12 days after you ovulate and it's positive, you might want to take an HCG test just to see if maybe you're pregnant. Now you can also get sort of like not a positive, but a darker OPK test right before your period. So this is like not a foolproof method, but you might notice that if you are pregnant, take one of these and it should be a blazing positive, possibly darker than the HCG test. Thank you so much for joining me to learn about ovulation tests today and testing our apple juice to find out that it is not ready to ovulate, but you might be. So come back here to learn more about trying to conceive, pregnancy, and other family topics.